Good morning, folks. Welcome to another of our daily devotions. This morning in our devotions, we're going to be spending our time thinking of another of the attributes of God that we find in this 36th Psalm. In verse 6 of the Psalm, we read this: "Your righteousness is like the mountains of God." The attributes of God mentioned here are His righteousness. The righteousness of God is that aspect of God's character where God always thinks and acts in a way that is right. In other words, in a way that no one can justly criticize of being wrong. It is without flaw. Being perfectly righteous, not only will God Himself do no wrong, but He has never treated anyone in this world wrongly. Now think of that. Think of all the people who have ever lived in this world. Think of the 8 billion people who now inhabit this planet. God has never, God will never, and God never can treat any human being unfairly. There are, of course, times in our lives when perhaps we might be tempted to think, and times when we might feel as though God has treated us unfairly. Times, for example, when things in life go pear-shaped and what we expected doesn't happen, what we hoped for doesn't materialize. Or perhaps when the demands and the responsibilities of life for us have become very, very hard. And we look at other people, maybe other people whom we would perceive to be less committed to the Lord, less godly, although we would never say that, than ourselves. Or we look at other people who are not even Christians, and they seem to be having a much easier and a much better life than us. And we feel, Lord, it's not fair. We feel a bit like the psalmist in Psalm 73. You remember that psalm? The psalmist looks at his life, he looks at the life of the ungodly, and he feels as though he has it much harder than them, and it's not fair. He says they have no pangs until death. Their bodies are fat and sleek. They're not in trouble as others are. They are not stricken like the rest of mankind. And then he goes on and he says, "In vain I have kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence." That's how the psalmist felt. God wasn't treating him righteously, fairly. And yet, the reality is, despite how we feel, God is always righteous in His dealings with us. He is perfectly fair. He does what is right. Isn't that what Abraham said? The judge of all the earth will do what's right. The psalmist says that this righteousness of God is like the mountains of God. Some translations have like great mountains. It's a poetical way of speaking of the steadfastness, the immovability, the unshakable character, the unchangeableness, if you like, of God's righteousness. But there's another aspect of God's righteousness that we can think about this morning, and that is the righteousness of God in the sense of the righteousness that God expects from us. It too is immovable. It too is like a great mountain. It doesn't change. And that standard of righteousness is the same as the righteousness of God Himself. He demands that we have a perfect righteousness. What is true of Him? If we are to be right with Him and to have fellowship with Him, what is true of him is also to be true of us. Now, such righteousness, of course, is something that not only do we not have, but it's something that we cannot achieve. No matter how hard we try, our righteousness will always fall far short of being perfect. In fact, the Bible tells us that even our best efforts at righteousness are like filthy rags. And that, of course, is why we need God to provide and give us the perfect righteousness that we do not have. To give us a righteousness that will cover over and completely and forever cancel our flawed righteousness. And the righteousness he gives us is the righteousness of his Son, Jesus. Jesus is the one of whom Jeremiah speaks, Jehovah Tsidkenu, the Lord our righteousness. And when a person by faith trusts in Jesus Christ as their Saviour, God gives that person the perfect righteousness of Christ. And here's the thing, that righteousness that is given to us is as perfect as God's own righteousness, because it is his righteousness. It is the righteousness of God. Isn't that what Paul says in the book of Romans when he's speaking about the wonderful message of the gospel? He says, in the gospel, a righteousness of God, from God, has been revealed. And that righteousness is received by faith. How wonderful it is, brethren, to share in the righteousness of God. How wonderful it is to be seen by God as being completely righteous. That's an amazing thought, that God sees us as being as completely righteous as he himself is. Dear Christian friend, rejoice that you have such a righteousness. If you're not a Christian, such a righteousness, the righteousness that you need, only comes through Jesus Christ. And as believers, we should rejoice in this wonderful aspect of God's character, that he is righteous in all his dealings with us. That we know that God is perfectly righteous in all he does, and that will never change. May God bless you as you think about these things today. Every blessing.